Move. Come here, doctor.
Man, I gotta go. I'm working, I'm working.
Doctor, this is the mayor talking.
All right.
Doctor?
Come on, what?
Always do the right thing.
That's it?
That's it.
I got it. I'm gone.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a masterful work of cinema. Each month we send happy birthday wishes to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee, everything from a 20th all the way to a 100th anniversary. I'm your host, Eric Martin, creator and moderator of the Cineverse Film Discussion Group that meets weekly in the Chicagoland area. It's the peak of summer, and it's the perfect time to revisit one of the all-time great movies set in the summertime, Do the Right Thing, which marks a 30th anniversary in July. Like any good birthday party, Cineversary invites special guests to join in the celebration. This time around, I'm pleased to welcome Monica Ndounou, Associate Professor of Theater at Dartmouth College, who teaches in the Department of African and African American Studies and the Department of Film and Media Studies. Monica and I will explore why the film is worth celebrating all these years later, its cultural impact and legacy, what we can learn from the picture today, how it stood the test of time, and more. Prior to my interview with Monica, here's some crucial background on this month's Spotlight picture, a la Wikipedia. Do the Right Thing is a 1989 American comedy drama film produced, written, and directed by Spike Lee. It stars Lee and Danny Aiello, Ossie Davis, Ruby Dee, Richard Edson, Giancarlo Esposito, Bill Nunn, John Turturro, and Samuel L. Jackson, and it's also the feature film debut of Martin Lawrence and Rosie Perez. The story follows a Brooklyn neighborhood's simmering racial tension, which culminates in tragedy on a hot summer day. The movie was a commercial success and received numerous accolades, including Academy Award nominations for Best Original Screenplay and Best Supporting Actor for Aiello's portrayal of Sal, the pizzeria owner. It's often listed among the greatest films of all time. Do the Right Thing currently boasts a 92% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an average critical score of 8.91 out of 10. In 1999, the film was deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant in its first year of eligibility by the Library of Congress and was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. The picture debuted on July 21, 1989, and it grossed over $37 million on a $6 million budget. Let's give a listen to the film's original trailer.
It's gonna be a scorcher today.
Universal Pictures presents a new film from Spike Lee.
Good morning, Miss Mother Sister.
Now, Mookie, don't work too hard today. The man says it's gonna be hot as the devil.
I've been here 25 years. Sal's famous pizzeria is here to stay. Trust me.
Mookie, the last time I trusted you, we ended up with a son.
I know you can't stand it. You can't stand it.
Hey, Sal, I'm getting a burst from the wall here.
You want brothers on the wall? Love. Get your own place. You can do what you want to do.
89, the number. Another summer.
What I tell you about that noise? What I tell you about that picture?
Give us what we want. Gotta give us
You talk to him, brother. Talk to him.
You the man. No, you the man. No, you the man.
Are you the man?
The first time you turn your back, boom. Right here, man, in the back. Y'all take a chill. You like to sign a petition to boycott Sal's famous pizzeria?
Hear me, what you ought to do is boycott that no-good barber that messed up your head.
And that's the double truth.
Rude. Fight the power. Fight the power. We got the...
You know, deep down inside, I think you wish you were black.
Who told you to step on my sneakers? Who told you to walk on my side of the block? Who told you to be in my neighborhood? I own this brownstone. Who told you to buy a brownstone on my block, in my neighborhood, on my side of the street? I can't even hear myself think.
From Spike Lee, director of School Days and She's Gotta Have It.
Good people, please. If we don't stop this and stop it now, we're gonna do something we're gonna regret for the rest of our lives. Doctor,
Come on, what?
always do the right thing.
That's it?
That's it.
I got it. I'm gone.
Okay, so before we commence with the interview, just an advance warning, spoilers ahead. So if you've not viewed Do the Right Thing, what are you waiting for? Do yourself a favor, pause this podcast, go watch the movie, and come back. Y'all back? All right, it's time to welcome Dartmouth professor Monica Ndounou. So welcome, Monica, and thanks for being a guest on Cineversary.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Oh, it's a treat to be able to have you here and to talk about a very important film that's celebrating a 30th birthday this summer. Now, I run a film discussion group in my neck of the woods, and we recently watched this, and it really made such a strong impression on me all these years later. It's been a few years since I've seen it, but it still packs a powerful punch, and I'm thrilled to have the chance to talk to you about it.
Same here. We actually had a screening of the film at the 2018 International Black Theater Summit that I recently hosted at Dartmouth this past fall. So I think that was probably my last screening of the film.
I see. And how many times would you say you've seen Do the Right Thing?
I honestly could not count.
Wow, so that many times.
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, I feel like I'm in good hands here. I've probably seen it 4 or 5 times, but I'm going to defer to your expertise on a lot of this stuff, as is appropriate because, of course, you teach this film and many other works of cinema. So we are privileged to have you here as a guest. So let's get into it, Monica. When and where did you first see Do the Right Thing? Was it in the summer of '89 in a movie theater?
To be honest, I don't remember the exact date or location where I first saw the film. I remember I heard about it before I saw it. And the reason for this is the area where I grew up in Florida, we didn't get a lot of predominantly Black cast films on a regular basis in that area. If they came to the area, it's after they had already been in some of the other major cities for a while. And so, as you know, the film had quite a bit of buzz when it first came out. And so I heard a lot about the film, and I think the first time I saw it was actually on video at a friend's house and not actually in the theater.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I didn't see it in the theater myself originally. I don't recall myself. I know it was on home video. I just don't remember the year. But why is this movie important to you personally, as well as maybe even professionally as a film professor?
I think it's important to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And for me, around the time that it came out, I was sort of at a stage in my own development as a person and an artist where I was starting to become increasingly aware of injustice and also increasingly aware of the fact that I could not see a lot of the movies featuring people who looked like me in a movie theater. Going to the movies was quite an event. When you had a film that came out that had a predominantly Black cast, we always wanted to support it. And during this time, again, like I said, I wasn't able to see it when it was in theaters, but I do remember that it had an impact on me because of the content of the film, but also just because it was beautifully filmed. The color, the saturated colors, it's just a beautiful film in terms of the look and feel of it, and also a very powerful story. And so you combine that with a lot of the elements, like just even the opening credits, Rosie Perez dancing in that sequence in the beginning, it sets up the story in a way that I hadn't really seen in other films prior to that. And so it was quite a bit of an awakening as an artist and an audience in thinking about what is the power of cinema.
Well said. Yeah, I was going to say there had been really nothing like this before, just in terms of all the elements you just expressed, the quality of the filmmaking, the quality of the storytelling, seeing African American voices, work so expressively in cinema. It's not like this was the first of its kind per se, but we'll get into this a little bit in terms of ways it was groundbreaking or pioneering. I'd be very curious to get your perspective on a lot of that. But yeah, I think it just opened a lot of eyes to, we had not seen movies like this before, and it's about time.
So Spike Lee he didn't invent the wheel. I think he like the beginning of another wave of filmmaking that's starting to happen around that time, because there were filmmakers like the LA School of Rebellion, all of these Black filmmakers from UCLA who had been making these, beautiful, powerful films. But the thing is, they weren't getting the same amount of distribution. And so film, it kind of breaks in a way that a lot of previous films had not, in terms of telling this particular type of story for a mainstream audience. I think that's what makes it an important sort of milestone in Black cinema. Not that it's the first of its kind to do it, but that it is the beginning of a new wave of Black film that's started this time.
Right. Right. That makes sense. But why is this movie worth celebrating 30 years later, in your opinion? Why does it still matter? And how has Do the Right Thing stood the test of time?
Well, I think the fact that you contacted me to talk about it it says it all, because we know that there are several people who were impacted by the film. The Obamas famously saw this film on their first date.
That's right. I read about
Yeah,
that.
and so I think it's in a lot of people's imaginations because of that. I think it's worth celebrating because of the story that's on the screen. I think it's still very relevant. Unfortunately, the over-policing of Black communities and the effects that that has on the residents in the community. There are issues of like gentrification becomes an issue that's raised, ownership of property and those sorts of things, inter and intra-racial conflicts, various levels. So there's so much happening within the film that I think it's a really important document for that particular sort historical moment. Not to say this is exactly what Brooklyn was like at that time, but even Spike Lee has said that that was one of the things because of the mayor of that time. The city was really racially stratified in a way that is really captured in the film. So I think it's worth celebrating and revisiting to see what that climate was like in that time, but it also sheds light on what our current climate is now. And so what I found is that even when I show this film to students who weren't even born when it first came out, they are very much tuned in to the film and the messages in the film, and they definitely can relate to it. It's also because it's a film that was in conversation with things that were happening in its time, and also it inspired a lot of work that followed as well.
Yeah, I'd like to get into some of those influences and inspiration just a bit, but yeah, well said. Any further thoughts before I chime in?
I guess the other thing that I was just going to say too is that there were a lot of performances and performers in that film that really stood out and stand the test of time. Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee are featured in that film prominently, and I love showing this film to students. Roger Smith, who is also featured in the film, he actually he performed his one-man show of Frederick Douglass at the Summit. And so even just seeing like how the work of a lot of the artists who appeared in the film or the performers in the film, Martin Lawrence, it was his first film, Robin Harris,
right.
Who was also a comedian in the film. But Robin Harris passed away not long after that film was made. And so a lot of Black stars, I think. Samuel L. Jackson is in the film, So it lives on through the work of the people who helped make the film what it is. A lot of the people who were in that film have gone on to have, notable careers, and they're still shaping representation now.
Yeah. Here's my 2 cents on this answer here. How is this to the time? Why is it worth celebrating? And maybe I'm coming at it from a different perspective or a similar one, but I'll let you, of course, retort. But I think it matters because it attempts to show how all races are capable of racial intolerance. And you consider like the diatribe monologue in the middle of the movie where it features the rants to the camera by people of different races. You can make a case that shows some impartiality or fairness on the filmmaker's part. I don't think the Spike Lee and his crew are condoning what is being said. It's just the point is it's not all one agenda per se. And I think that that's to the movie's strength. I think it also matters because it doesn't give viewers any easier answers or solutions to the problem of bigotry and prejudice. We see how both, Sal and Mookie, whom some viewers can relate to or sympathize with or understand, each of these characters are capable of non-constructive words and acts. They're not perfect, these characters. They have shades of gray, but they're also some stereotypical angles to their characters too. But you can make a case that there are no good or bad guys here. There are some characters whom you sympathize with that do unsympathetic things, like Sal bashing the radio or Mookie throwing the garbage, right? So look at Mookie. He's the main character, but he has flaws. He's not a responsible father or a boyfriend. He's lax in some of his duties on the job, for example. And yet we follow him throughout the course of the story, and a lot of our sympathies and allegiances and rooting interests are with Mookie. Sal, on the other hand, he demonstrates kindness and understanding to his black customers, but we see that he can also be gruff, he can be impatient, he can be violent, he can be bigoted in his words and action. Take a character like DeMayer, who serves as kind of a conscience of the movie. He preaches doing the right thing and he deplores the riot at the end. But he's not perfect. He drinks a lot to escape his pain. His well-intentioned messages often go ignored. So the point I'm making is Spike Lee and his collaborators wisely, don't paint in broad brushes with all these characters. There are facets and nuances to their characters. There are imperfections that go along, and I think that helps us relate to them on a human level. I also think the film attempts to distill themes and situations reductively. It condenses them into the space of one day, and its primary focus, if you agree, is on race relations. But it doesn't try to tackle every societal problem like drugs or poverty or gang violence, etc. He's not throwing everything into one big duffel bag here. On one hand, I'd be curious to get your perspective on this, but several of the characters appear to be stereotypes, possessing oversimplified characteristics that are broadly drawn and that conform closely to the idea of a preconceived type. But on the other hand, these sometimes stereotypical characters have nuances and, as I said, shades of gray that make them more distinctive. For example, Sal, he shows that he can be both tender and kind as well as judgmental and violent. What do you think about that, Monica?
Well, I think that one of the things that made this film so intriguing, particularly for Black audiences, was the fact that you had a film that is getting broad enough distribution to a mainstream audience that has layered Black characters. And that's not to say that the other characters are not, but I think that for me, that was what was most of interest to me. Because a lot of the representation that you would see in, let's say, predominantly white cast films with a Black character, the Black characters don't even have a backstory. Sometimes they don't even have a name. And so what you film like this is the characters, they have names, even though, like Robin Harris's character was Sweet Dick Willie, we have a very interesting, a range of people are being represented over the course of the film. And I think it's worth noting that unless, like in some cases, there's not a lot of detail in terms of the characterization of the police officers. I would say, I think Sal has given enough depth for us not to totally demonize him, but at the same time, I think it was important that he wasn't the focus. That, in fact, that's one of the reasons why I think the film should be celebrated, because part of the backstory in the making of the film is that Spike Lee was originally filming the project with Paramount. But then when he was told at the last minute, he had to change the ending, the relationship between Sal and Mookie, where Spike Lee, he basically described it as having them hug at the end and saying, "We are the world." Yeah, so he refused to do that, and he actually took the film to Universal, where he received less money, I think a $6.3 million budget, as opposed to the $8 to $10 million budget he had with Paramount, to have the creative control. Because what happens then is that the story then becomes more focused on, Sal and the racial reconciliation, that tends to happen in Hollywood films about interracial conflict, that somehow there's some form of forgiveness that happens on, Black people forgiving white people for their transgressions without any actual social justice or structural changes, that would allow for social justice. And so I think what Spike Lee does with the characterizations, and again, I don't claim any movie is a perfect movie, but what he's doing with these characterizations and the stories is he's pushing back against a lot of the narratives and characterizations we've seen before this.
No, those are great points. And I love that he doesn't let audiences off the hook. Like you said, if he wanted to acquiesce and give in to studio demands, he could have made it a kumbaya ending. And what I love about Do the Right Thing is it challenges viewers to ask difficult questions and to look inside themselves, whether you're black or white or whatever race. And it's such a thought-provoking, dialogue-inspiring kind of ending. It pissed a lot of people off. I know people who I talked to about this movie over the years, and some of the reactions I've gotten is, I love the movie up until the end. What's with the end? Why is it so, violent or ambiguous or unresolved? Or, why do they destroy the property? How is that supposed to make me feel better about it? And I remember when I first saw the movie, I was kind of conflicted about it too. I'm a white person, but I can understand. I put myself in other people's shoes and ask, what if, or how would they feel versus the other person. And so over subsequent viewings, I'm not saying I totally get the ending and I put myself in Spike Lee's head. I can't do that, but it makes more sense to me. And it just feels absolutely right because I think the uncompromising nature of how it doesn't tie everything up in a nice little ribbon at the end is the best part of the movie. You've never seen a movie like this. What do you think about that?
I was curious when you were saying you spoke with people who had questions about, like, why did they destroy the property? Did they ask why did the police kill Radio Raheem?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, and so I think, and this is one of the reasons why we have the Black Lives Matter movement now, and think this film resonates with my students because they get it. They recognize that Sal is really disturbed and destroyed that the business that he built has been destroyed. But what a life of Radio Raheem.
It's so easy to dismiss that. That was often kind of a question that came up when I talked to other people about it. And I thought the same thing you did. Well, you just witnessed a murder, basically. So, and I don't think, we could talk about this in just a moment, but I don't think Spike Lee is letting everybody off the hook here or, coming down on one agenda or another. But I think he's expressing the outrage and maybe some of the untapped emotions, at least expressively in a movie, let's put it that way, that you had never seen before, at least to a mainstream audience. Would you agree with that?
I think he definitely taps into, again, like I said, around that time I was having my own sort of awakening to understanding like the depth and magnitude of oppression and injustice. And I think he taps into this, rising consciousness that I won't even say it's a rising consciousness. It's an outgrowth really of the eras that preceded it. And so you can see him tapping into that even by having Public Enemy create basically the anthem for the film, Fight the Power. It's a critical element of the movie, considering how much it's used throughout. And so I think he's definitely tapping into that, at least for Black audiences. I'll speak from my own perspective as a Black woman who saw that film around that time and has continued to watch it. In many ways, it was acknowledging the suppressed rage that many in these communities are, experiencing just on witnessing the countless deaths from police brutality and all the other forms of injustice. And especially when you're able to connect that, because one of the things I do remember is around this time, I read Roots, Alex Haley's Roots for the first time. And so that was one of the things, even in watching that film, I was slowly making the connection between what I was seeing on screen and the history of slavery. It wasn't until later in life that I really got the connection, but he tapped into something, I think, with those images and really showing the uprising. And some people may call it a riot, but it was an uprising by a community that was being over-policed.
I see. Okay. So in what ways do you think that Do the Right Thing was influential on cinema and popular culture or set trends in any way?
Again, I think because the power of the soundtrack and the careers of a lot of the actors who were in the film and also Spike Lee himself, they've all gone on, or many of them have gone on to just be fixtures within popular culture anyway. And so I think even having a vehicle like this to shed light on this level and range of talent is, I think, influential. The other things that people may not know beyond the film is that Spike Lee, he fought to have more people of color join the Teamsters so they could be or join the union, so even working on set. So there are things that are happening within the film that I think are influential, but there are also the things that are happening in the process of making it that's also having an influence. And I also wanted to note Ruth E. Carter who is the costume designer that just won an Academy Award for Black Panther. She was the costume designer on this film. That's why it's really important to have these opportunities where actors, designers, directors can actually work with material that resonates, because they can then carry that into their careers, into other projects.
Good points. You could also make a case here. This is arguably, you tell me if you disagree, but maybe the most important, the most widely reviewed and seen, and perhaps maybe even the best movie made by an African American filmmaker to date. What would you say about that? I mean, I am not a film historian. I tried doing a little bit of research on here, and some of the answer here is just subjective. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is this groundbreaking in terms of this is, the biggest movie by an African American to date in some ways?
I think that's a really big statement. I don't want to challenge the importance and power of this film, but I think there are a lot of films that have been made that people never got a chance to see.
Okay.
Spike Lee was privileged in his position to be associated or affiliated with a major studio. There was recently an article about this where there were a lot of Black filmmakers in the 1990s who basically had a chance to do one, maybe two films, but were, in their words, set up for failure because there was no contingency plan for them to continue working in Hollywood. And this isn't this is with Black directors, but also there are women directors. He's building off of the legacy of those filmmakers that came before him, like the Halle Jaramas, the Charles Burnett's, Julie Dash, who her film actually comes out in 91. Oh, Daughters of the Dust is the film that I'm referring to, Julie Dash. Xanabu Irene Davis is another person I want to mention here because she was part of that school of filmmaking where they were intentionally using the medium to tell stories from their own cultural perspective. What Spike Lee is doing, he's building on a foundation that they lay, but they didn't get the same kind of distribution. In Spike Lee's film, Do the Right Thing, you see this sort of unapologetically Black embracing of, I'm going to tell this story the way that I see it. And again, it's coming out of that earlier tradition.
Well, we can agree to some extent here. I mean, of course, it legitimized Spike Lee as a major filmmaking talent, this movie. I mean, it had a box office success of, from what I see here, it's $37 million earned on a $6 million budget. So to me, what does that say? Does it prove that movies that more realistically depicted the African-American experience and made by Black filmmakers, that they could be profitable, highly acclaimed, and worth greenlighting? Is there any merit to that? Do you agree with that?
Well, the reality is, and that's what I write about in my book, Shaping the Future of African American Film. And the subtitle is Color Coded Economics and the Story Behind the Numbers. And so I actually look at those, at that type of information, that data, and I find that actually the performance of Lee's film is consistent with the performance of African American films. They tend to receive lower budgets and make a higher return on investment than predominantly white cast films more consistently.
Is that right?
And that's been the case for quite some time. But there's Hollywood continues to perpetuate the myth that Black films are not bankable or they don't sell overseas. And all of these excuses as to why there's less investment in telling Black stories.
Amazing.
Yeah, and it's problematic because then what happens is, Spike Lee's film did well. For a while, he became like the poster child for Black film. And, which is, again, problematic because we have other Black filmmakers who are also capable.
Right.
And in the larger text of Hollywood, you don't have just one white, director that's making movies.
Yeah.
It's kind of a catch-22 with the success that happened at that point. But again, the film is still worth celebrating.
Well, I'm really glad that you got me up to speed on some of those facts there. But it's good to hear, if what you're saying is correct, that there is a market for African American filmmakers.
Right.
And it sounds like their films can be profitable and widely seen. It's just that, as you said, there's a myth that gets perpetuated, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm hoping going forward is that, number one, the power of this story, again, is not just what appears on screen, but what he did behind the scenes in terms of, making sure he maintained a certain amount of ownership over the story, and also bringing people in. And, those are the types of the things that we need to know. And also to know that 30 years later, that there is technology that exists. There are ways in which we can bypass the gatekeepers that made it difficult for Spike Lee and other Black filmmakers to actually produce consistently.
What's the moral to do the right thing? What's the message, or what are some different themes that are examined here that you'd like to talk about?
I think it's pretty straightforward. The moral is to do the right thing.
So what does that mean in the universe of the characters and so forth? And how are audiences supposed to interpret that? Because I got to be honest with you, there are a lot of people I talk to this movie about, even among my own film circle, who I don't want to say they're perplexed by the ending or anything. It's pretty clear and straightforward. I would agree with you. But maybe they just don't see it from different points of view or something like that. So maybe that's a theme unto itself, right? Put yourself in other people's shoes.
Well, I think a lot of people will have their own perceptions of it based on what their experiences are.
Yeah.
And that's cool. But one of the things that I read into it is, I think one of the first lines that we hear in the film is "Wake up," which Sam Jackson's character as the radio DJ, I think he's saying "Wake up," right?
That's right.
Which is like the last line in the film, "School Days," which is, I think, which precedes "Do the Right Thing."
Ah, nice segue.
Yeah, so it seems like sort of bridging, some of the ideas in both films. And so it's interesting in thinking about it now with so many people claiming to be woke, and thinking about, well, if you are woke, if you are clear about and understand what's going on, what are you going to do about it? So for me, it's the moral is to be active, to do the right thing. What is the right thing? Sometimes it's really clear and other times it isn't. But we have to do something. I think we can't just sit back and allow things to continue as they are. And so I think what people choose to do is going to be different, based on their circumstances and, their, I don't want to say level of understanding, because it's not a hierarchy of understanding the way that I see it, but just what is their process for understanding the way that the world is structured, or the society is structured within the world, and what types of things we can be doing to improve it.
I also see a theme as people of all colors and backgrounds need to be accountable for their personal actions. Do you agree, or do you think that's too simplistic?
Can you say more?
I don't think Spike I think he's being an equal opportunity kind of messenger here, in the sense that he has characters of different ethnicities, and he shows the good and bad quality. And I think just tying into what you said, moral being do the right thing, people taking personal responsibility for their actions. For example, Rosie Perez's character asking her boyfriend to be more active and engaged and responsible in their child's life, for example. That's what I'm getting at here.
Okay, yeah, I think there is a certain amount of looking at the different circumstances of the different characters and, I think evaluating sort of where they fit in terms of the way the world is operating and working, and, does Bugging Out have the right to insist to have brothers on the wall in Sal's diner? And Sal says, well, if you want brothers on the wall, then you need to get your own place and put the brothers on the wall. So yeah, there are those things that are there. But again, I think if you put this film in conversation with, a lot of other films that are dealing with similar issues, then you get a large, say a bigger picture of how all of this is interconnected in terms of like the history and that sort of thing. So again, I'm hesitant to make that claim that he's like an equal opportunity. How did you say it?
Messenger.
Equal opportunity messenger. But I do think he does. He has enough variety in the film for people consider where they're positioned within all of these conflicts and communities.
Well, I think, do you agree that Spike and his collaborators, they were aiming not just for an African-American viewership here, but they were trying to appeal to multiple races, to multiple ethnicities and different viewers, so that, as you said, you can kind of wake up, you can open some eyes, because if it's too one-sided, the argument is, well, maybe you're going to miss a lot of the message to the people if you're trying to kind of broadcast to a wider group. And the fact is, a lot of different people saw this movie. This wasn't just marketed to African Americans, wherever they may be. I think that this was kind of a turning point, a touchstone kind of a movie that was meant to reach out to people of all different kinds of backgrounds. What would you say?
I would say one of the challenges for people of color in the film industry is often this need to have to try to appeal. We call it crossover appeal, which generally is a film's ability to appeal to predominantly white audiences, even if it has a cast that's predominantly people of color, right? And usually the way that's structured is you have like a white character that we refer to as the white point of entry that the white audience can identify with. And so what I find with this film is Spike Lee, he uses those same sort of formulaic elements that are required in order to get distribution. But I think he still centers Black audiences, which doesn't mean that it can't appeal to people who are not Black. Because I find that a lot of mainstream films are not concerned about being one-sided, or only, showing a perspective that excludes people of color. But the reverse is expected for films by and about people of color. And so I think one of the reasons why this film has had such a strong following for the past 30 years, and that people like the Obamas, who again saw the film on their first date, that it's something about it where that you and your experience did not have to be sidelined in order for this story to be told. You don't get that in a lot of the other films. Like the same year that Do the Right Thing was released, that year Driving Miss Daisy won the Academy Award for Best Picture, right?
That's right.
You can tell those stories where the Black audience is not the center, that the story is really designed to appeal to a white audience primarily, and then if other people get it, great.
Yeah.
But this film, you can see how he does seem to be centering Black audiences with all of these visual cues, oral cues, just the structure of the narrative, the characterizations, the performances of the actors, the setting itself, the use of color, like just there's so many elements where as a Black audience, it's like, yeah, he recognized the value of the Black audience and he told a story that could still resonate with other people. And it doesn't have to be one way or the other. And I think that's the powerful message to take from this film going forward.
That was an amazing explanation, and I never thought about it that way. So you've really opened my eyes to a different take on Do the Right Thing, because I always looked at it as more of kind of an objective kind of look, without having a quote unquote agenda. And agenda doesn't have to be a bad word here, but what I'm getting at is I never really saw it the way that you just explained it, and it makes me think about it more. I want to see it again now. But I think you can agree, the vast majority of people that probably saw this movie were not Black, and that's to the movie's credit. As you say, it appealed to a wider audience, and it got wider distribution, and maybe he had to use some of those other formulaic elements to be able to get that. But still, it's a good thing that a lot of different people saw it.
Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge there's a French film, La Haine, by Matthew Kassovitz, I believe is his name. Matthew Kassovitz. And that film, again, you can see the influence of Do the Right Thing, but it's a French film and it's set in the surrounding suburbs of Paris, where a lot of people of color live and are also over-policed and experiencing some of the same situations that are reflected or depicted in Do the Right Thing. And so, again, this film had a strong domestic audience that included Black people and people from a lot of different backgrounds, and still has a following. So I think that can't be discounted. I think the main thing for me is to say this is not an anomaly. It doesn't have to be, but it's often talked about in that way, that somehow just because you have a predominantly Black cast film, that it can't do that work. But it does. Our films do this all the time.
Yeah, well spoken. This is a birthday celebration, 30th anniversary of Do the Right Thing. And birthdays are all about getting presents, except my case is it's the fans who continue to get the gifts. So, what is this movie's greatest gift to viewers?
I think the performances of Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis are a gift. They do beautiful work in everything they've done. But there was something about seeing them in this film, and it was, in a way, Spike Lee bridging one generation of actors and introducing them to another generation. And also Radio Raheem's message of love and hate. The character Radio Raheem is just endearing anyway. And so to witness what happens to him, and you see the reality that this type of violence, that police brutality can happen even to someone who is not even participating or drawing that type of attention to warrant that type of violence. And so I think it's those types of messages in the film. And also I'll point out the Malcolm and Martin Smiley, played by Roger Guinevere Smith, and his love for Malcolm and Martin. Again, it introduces the legacy of resistance, against these oppressive structures through those figures. The comedian Robin Harris, who is a gift that we lost way too soon.
Oh, he's so good in the movie.
His death was just really sad because we lost a great talent. And so this film is a great document of his work. And Rosie Perez's opening dance sequence is like unmatched. And so it's a document too, in many ways, of what the dance styles were like in that time period. But it was also just like another way of looking at, even dance as a form of resistance. Rosie Perez's dance movements, and even if you look at the way she's moving, she's like taking something on, right? Some sort of invisible force in the way she moves.
Yeah.
And Radio Raheem, the constant playing of the music, it's taking up space. And I think the film, in many ways, just reminds us of, the different ways in which we can also occupy, inhabit, and enjoy the space. So, yeah, those are the gifts.
Do you think Do the Right Thing will still be widely watched and considered relevant in another 30 years?
I think it's quite possible for a lot of different reasons. One, I do hope that in 30 years that our issues with police brutality have improved, so that should the film be relevant during that time, it would be for a different reason. But I do think, again, like I said, some of the performers in the film, the beautiful cinematography of Ernest Dickerson.
Hear, hear.
All of those things, I think, will lend, strength to the film for a future audience.
Okay, so you predict good things, as do I. I think this is going to remain a really important movie. Hopefully, maybe for even different reasons, but one that will definitely live on in terms of what it can teach us today and then. What are you currently working on, Monica, that listeners should check out? Anything in the works?
Yes, actually, I mentioned earlier the 2018 International Black Theater Summit that I hosted at Dartmouth College in collaboration with the Craft Institute this past fall. And that event, it was a reconvening and celebration of an event that legendary playwright August Wilson held there 20 years ago.
Okay.
And so we're having a follow-up event in 2020. So more on that at thecraftinstitute.org. And I'm also working on a book on Black American contributions to developing acting theory and practice.
Wow.
And so more than likely, I will be revisiting this film and the work of some of the performers.
Fantastic. Sounds like it's going to be required reading in some of your classes.
I'm hoping it's going to be required reading for everyone.
Wow, we'll keep our eye out for that. Were there any others that you want to name drop?
Directing Passover by Antoinette Nwandou, which is a stage play that just won the Lucille Lortel Award. And Spike Lee directed a film version of it in Chicago. So there's another Spike Lee connection there.
Interesting. And I'm curious, have you ever met him personally?
I have not, but I'm looking forward to as the opportunity presents themselves.
Hopefully, one of these days you guys will cross paths, and maybe you could ask him directly for more inside scoop on Do the Right Thing, and maybe put it in one of your future books. That would be kind of a fascinating exchange, right?
Oh, I think so.
Right. I just want to say thanks again for taking the time and appearing on Cineversary, and we really appreciate it, Monica.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
My special thanks to Dr. Ndounou for agreeing to participate in Cineversary. Time now for standing ovations. This is where I give a shout out to a movie, book, website, TV program, podcast, or other work that I think would be of interest to classic film lovers. Now, my standing ovation for July is, surprise, surprise, it's Do the Right Thing, which gets the deluxe treatment via the Criterion Collection on Blu-ray and separately on DVD this month. What we got here, folks, is a stellar 2-disc package that includes a new 4K digital restoration approved by cinematographer Ernest Dickerson. You've got audio commentary from 1995 featuring Spike Lee. It includes a documentary on the making of the film, new and archival interviews, introductions by Lee, music video for Public Enemy's Fight the Power, the Cannes Film Festival press conference from 1989. You got behind-the-scenes footage, you got deleted and extended scenes, they throw in original storyboards, trailer, and TV spots. You got an essay by critic Vincent Cunningham. It's just packed to the gills here. Now, best of all, Barnes & Noble is currently having its 50% off sale on all Criterion titles through August 4th, and that means you can purchase Do the Right Thing in-store or online from Barnes & Noble for only $20, half price. Now, that's a steal of a deal to get a half-price Criterion title, brand new one, brand spanking new, hot off the presses, and it looks and sounds fantastic. So, that's my standing ovation for July. All right, I hope you enjoyed this month's installment of Cineversary, and if you did, I have a favor to ask. I really want to expand our listenership, and I just need your help. So, would you mind spreading the good word about this show to your peeps? Also, leave us a positive review on whatever platform you hear it from, and that helps this show get discovered by new listeners, so I really appreciate that. Want to suggest a future movie due to celebrate an anniversary that we should, maybe consider devoting an episode to? You have a burning question for me? Or maybe you just want to offer some suggestions or comments? Tell you what, you can get a hold of me, Eric Martin, at cineversegroup@gmail.com. Like what you hear on this podcast? Well, I encourage you to visit cineversegroup.com. That's the portal for my Cineverse film discussion group that I launched 14 years ago and which continues to meet weekly in the South suburban Chicago area. Cineverse is a democratic film society that watches and then discusses a predetermined movie that our members pick on a rotating basis. At cineversegroup.com, and that's spelled Cineverse. You can hear podcast recordings of our group discussions. You can read more about the films we study and a lot of other goodies there too. I founded Cineverse and launched this podcast to foster an appreciation for and intelligent dialogue about memorable films. And we can all agree, watching movies is pretty dope. But I actually enjoy talking about films just as much. Few things in life to me are as fun as digging deeper to learn how and why a picture was made, the impact it's had on culture, society, and other movies, why that movie has the power to evoke a strong emotional reaction in each of us, and what the film can teach us today. Curious to learn where we'll turn our attention next month? Shh! Listen closely and you can hear the far-off sound of helicopters and, yep, Ride of the Valkyries. You guessed it, in August we'll wish a happy birthday, a big 40th in fact, to Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, originally released in August 1979. This has been your humble host, Eric Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and cherish those classic movies because, little secret, they're not getting older, folks. They are getting better. Thanks again for giving us a listen.